So, hello everyone. It's my pleasure to again be part of this excellent session on wheat, which is part of our Commodity Week 2026. Before we move further, I would request my colleague to give me a sound check and a video check. So, Neeraj, am I audible and visible?
Yes, sir, clearly.
Awesome. Thank you. So, guys, as you know that we had a very interesting session yesterday on maize, and we had speakers all the way from Black Sea to Middle East to Southeast Asia, and for sure South Asia, including India. We had a good discussion about the feed, fuel, and food debate. We also had discussion about the global geopolitics, as well as we had some discussion around how the bioenergy is playing a very pivotal role in important agriculture commodity like maize. Today, we have got an awesome gathering of some of the eminent speakers, which would be talking about another very important commodity, which is wheat. So before we move further, I would like to share my screen and make a small presentation on supply and demand aspect, and also what is in store for all of us. So as you know that this is the awesome panel which we are having today. We are having Mr. Hesham Soliman. We are having Anna Maria, Mitesh Gupta, Mark Ostwald, Cesar Suarez, Rajiv Yadav, and your truly Deepak Pareek, who will be moderating this session. And the topic which we are delving in today is geopolitics, food security, and price resilience, with focus on wheat. And we all know that wheat plays a very important role in a substantial part of the world. Now, as you know that this is a part of the 6 sessions which we plan to have under Commodity Week umbrella. Started yesterday with maize, as I explained you. Today we talk about wheat. We'll be talking about rice tomorrow, then soybean and edible oil on 8th of Jan, chickpeas on 9th January, and sugar on 10th January. We are also very happy to share that yesterday we had a phenomenal response to the maize session on LinkedIn. In fact, you are aware that this is a LinkedIn Live broadcasted session. And also, we have post session YouTube based video, which we circulate. And we have close to 2,800 odd impression during the session, and roughly 2,300 odd people looked at the video and engaged. Now, that's the beauty, where you are able to reach thousands of people while they're sitting in comfort of their offices. At the same time, also panelists doesn't need to travel anywhere to share their insights. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, or I would say grain in the room, that is wheat. So let's see a little bit about how the global perspective of supply and demand is. 2025-26 is going to be very interesting marketing year for wheat because our carry was not as high as last year, but the production has more than fulfilled that deficit. So in 2025-26, we are looking at 809 million metric tons of production of wheat, and the carry was roughly 253 million metric tons. Last year, we had production of close to 796 million metric tons. This was, I would say, that a little bit of lower than estimated because of the Indian crop was not as robust as it was estimated to be. This year, we are seeing that the crop is doing pretty well. And so far, there have not been much of sign of possible heat stress coming in. And hence, the Indian numbers have increased. I'll talk about that in our subsequent slides. Global trade, we are looking at a higher global trade. While we have seen that there was a dip in 2024-25 because of various geopolitical reasons, the premium because of various conflicts and bottlenecks due to the logistic issues in various part of the world. But 2025-26, we look that global trade will increase. That also shows that actually, the fundamental lower price of wheat is making a lot of countries not looking at just-in-time mechanism, but also trying to ensure that they make some buffers for rainy days. So supply is robust, close to 1,062 million metric tons. A billion metric tons is what supply this year would be. use, as I said, that when you have low price wheat available, the consumption also increase. So we will be having far more pastas and chapatis this year than we had in previous 3 years. Ending stock looks as good as last year. For very simple reason, the higher production has been taken care of also by higher demand. And this higher demand also stems from the fact that in countries like India, which are a huge consuming country for wheat, we find that actually the government PDS scheme has also started moving back to normalcy of providing wheat, unlike in past where they substituted a substantial amount of wheat with rice. Now let's look at the global key producers and exporters. So China, definitely one of the largest, but we don't see too much of increase in China. It would be as good as last year. So there is not too much of change in dynamics related to China. Coming to European Union, we are looking at little bit of increase in productivity in European Union from 120 million metric tons to 131 million metric tons. We are seeing that Germany, France, all of those, even Poland, they are doing pretty well when it comes to overall production. India last year 103, which we have revised. In fact, we were at a lower number in the starting of the season last year, lower than 100 million metric ton, but we have calibrated back to 103 million metric ton for 2024-25, and we'll see close to 3.5 to 4% increase over the last year, and hence in 2025-26 we are looking at 107 million metric ton of production. Russia, again, you see that huge upside. Russia is doing pretty well, and we are seeing that Russia might end up having a production of more than 87 million metric tons. And when it comes to US is also doing well. And initially there was a little bit of apprehension because of the high temperature and the dryness, but again, those apprehension has not been found it to be converting into a lower yield on the ground. And the US is also doing pretty well, and it is better than the last year with 52.4 million metric tons of production. Same, Canada is doing well. Ukraine is as good as last year, and Australia is a 10 above. So overall, you see that actually, all the key players or all the key producers, they are doing better than the last year. So that's create a situation where we'll be having far more wheat than actually what was last year. So all the dips we have seen in the product consumption of wheat, right, this year you'll find the recovery happening. Exports, Russia, definitely we are looking at 45 million metric tons of export from Russia. Canada, 28 million metric tons. EU, pretty high. So you find that because of the challenges of the war between Russia and Ukraine, a lot of demand, specifically from Middle East, is shifting towards European Union, and European Union will end up exporting 34 million metric tons this year. Coming to US is as good as last year. I would say a tad little bit low because of various tariff-related issues which US created, and most of the world is not very happy about those tariffs. I mean that we can see a little bit reflection in, I would say, that flat or lower than last year export from US, while even the crop is still higher. Australia, again, we'll see that they would be better than last year when it comes to export. Ukraine, as good as last year. Argentina, that's very interesting part of it because Argentina, I know that they have given incentive for export recently for all the grains, and which has definitely benefited maize, it has benefited, and it has also benefited a tad to the wheat as well. Kazakhstan, we have seen that there was a little bit of a challenge, and Kazakhstan crop was lower, and also the parity is not that great, and hence you find that the Kazakhstan might see, in percentage term, a serious dent when it comes to their exports. Now let's go to the largest player. In fact, I always love to say that India is a 12th man in global trade because India neither allow imports, neither allow exports of wheat. But at the same time, whole of the world is always having a keen interest in how the Indian number shapes up because one stroke of a pen by government in India when they disallow export or import uh, can have a huge repercussion for the global trade because India is a huge producer of wheat and a huge consumer of wheat. So India and China both are they're very critical whenever it comes to in wheat. Definitely, India plays a very. So as I said, that production has been consistently increasing from a very low 2022-23, where we dipped to 94 million metric tons, and 23-24 was also 96 million. In fact, there was a lot of talks that India might need to import. In fact, I was one among those who was thinking or was talking about that India should open imports, my apologies, imports, for a very simple reason that the price of Indian wheat has gone above what the common man could have taken, and the even government has to take measures where to the wheat consuming people in the public distribution schemes, they have to supplement it with rice. So luckily, India had too much of rice, and still it has too much of rice, and that was able to take care of the deficit in wheat, and India didn't import anything in past few years. 2024-25, things have started shaping up well, and production, while initially it looked a little bit lower because of the heat wave, and uh, eventually we found that while the quality, that is the protein content, has reduced in 24-25, substantial amount of crop, but overall production was, it was 103 million metric tons. So there was a good revival from 22-23 numbers and to 24-25 numbers. In 25-26, the Rabi season, the sowing has been robust. At the same time, also we see that so far the crop is doing pretty well, and we might have better than last year. So, like, we are looking at 3.5% increase over the last year. So India is back to normal of what we used to have in 2019, 2020, to the level of 105 to 107 in 25-26. Supply side is because the production is good, and the last year production was also better than what was anticipated. So even though, like, the demand was low, there was sufficient supply, and that led to a pretty decent ending stock. And that led to, like, scenario where we are having a very comfortable, I would say, supply of 120 million metric tons consumption when the government moved back to wheat from the rice, and OMS schemes also looks possible because there have been talk about it, and we see that the consumption increasing also to back to the 2021, 22, and 22, 23 levels, 205 million metric tons. So you will have ending stock of roughly 15 million metric tons, which is pretty healthy. So with that, I would stop my presentation, and I would like to invite my first panelist, and it is a privilege to have him, and he's a very seasoned hat. I would like to invite and introduce Mr. Hesham Soliman. He's a Cairo-based veteran of the global grain trade with deep expertise in North African market. And we all know that Egypt and North Africa is one of the largest consumer of wheat, or importer of the wheat. As president of Mediterranean Staff for Trading, he serves as a critical bridge between Black Sea, European origin, and the massive demand centers of Egypt and the MENA region. A frequent speaker at events like Global Grain Geneva, Hesham is known for his sharp analysis of Egypt's public and private sector's role in food security. His perspective is grounded in operational reality of managing import flows amidst currency fluctuations and geographical disruption in Mediterranean corridor. Welcome, Mr. Hesham. Pleasure to have you, sir.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for the nice introduction and the nice presentation you added. It's my pleasure to be with you and your audience. It's nice to exchange data and information about this market.
So, Mr. Hesham, your initial views of how do you see the global wheat trade going? How it is pan out in next year or so?
In my opinion, that as you mentioned in your presentation, the production this year is very good. And the prices, although of the good production, went up a little bit because of the geopolitical tension in the market. So the fundamentals we get used on doing trading is changed right now. We are not counting only on supply and demand. It's a new rule come into this market and has a big involvement, which is the geopolitical problems, which led to many problems in the market. It has a big effect on the freight, has big effect on the insurance, has a big effect on the price of the commodity. So the traders everywhere now is not doing the business as we get used. It's not, we are not counting on anymore on the fundamentals of the supply and demand. So, but anyway, the market this year is very good. Crop is everywhere in good. France is okay. Canada, Australia, Russia, Ukraine, Romania. We don't see any problems in the crops all over the world. But the problem itself, as I mentioned, is the newcomer. The new big problem we are facing, all of us, is the geopolitical.
Thanks a lot, sir, for the overall perspective. Now, coming very specifically to your market, which you are operating in, we have seen of late that actually, because of the constraints we have seen or the risk premium which have seen in the Black Sea, there is a interest of moving to the origins which are Baltic or European or even going all the way to Australia. How do you see that pan out? And actually, are the parities there so that to replace typically the one of the largest supplier to you, which was the Black Sea region?
First of all, as you know that we are in MENA region, and the MENA region is importing about 60 million tons of grains yearly. Egypt has a big share of this quantity, is around 47% of this total is coming from Egypt. Okay. We cannot deny that because of these problems we are seeing between Ukraine and Russia, especially, make the Egyptian importers to try to find another origins than the Black Sea. We managed in doing this in the corn and the soya. We went to Brazil and Argentina instead of Ukraine in the supply of the maize. But unfortunately, the price is still in wheat for the Black Sea, which is dominating the imports activities in the region of the MENA and Egypt, especially as the import ratio was 85% coming of the total import, which is almost this year. Let me give you a hint. In 2025, where we exceed 30 million tons of wheat, 85% were coming from Russia and Ukraine. These two origin, okay, because of the price. Still, if you have the French wheat, which was not existing in 2024 in Egyptian market, now it has a big share, not a big share, but a new share with 5 or 6% of the total import. But the problem itself is that, for example, the French wheat is only imported by the government. And as you all of us know, that the government was used by GASP, and now it has been changed since 1 year. We have Mustaqbal Masr agency who replaced the GASP. It's belonging to the Egyptian army. And we were competing with GASP. Competition was between the private sector and the GASP. The market was almost 50-50. But since last year, the share of the private sector has jumped up. We are now talking about 60-40, 60% for the favor of the private sector and 40 for Mustaqbal Masr. And the 12 since 13 million tons we import this year, it was almost 5.5 for the Mustaqbal Masr agency, and the balance was for the private sector, which means that the private sector share is becoming bigger and bigger in the market. And this is give a very flexibility to the Egyptian importer working in the private sector to knock every door to find another origin to replace the Ukrainian and the Russian wheat because of the tense of the geopolitical problems. But still, the prices is a big factor for any trader. When you have, for example, the EU wheat is very expensive than the Black Sea. So we're still counting on the Black Sea origins to supply the Egyptian needs. Although that we, all of us has a big idea that the UN put sanctions list on some penalties on the Russian country, which make problems for payment especially, and limit some of the trading activities for the Russian.
And so another issue that we have seen that I understand that this geopolitics is working also on another area, which is actually the forex, right? There we are seeing the currency prices have become so volatile. There is something around 35 to 37% increase in ruble to the INR, or I would say even the currency. Similarly, we are seeing that actually how the euro versus US is panning out, and some of the currencies is including those in the Middle East, those which are not directly tied with the US dollar, also seen some weaknesses. So how do you see that actually forex also impacting the trading community? And how do we take care of that? Because the parity, finding the parity in whichever is suitable, it becomes a really difficult.
You're totally right. It's a very sensitive issue. That's the foreign exchange rate. For example, in Egypt in 2023 and 2022, we faced a hell of problems. There was no US dollars in the market, and the black market was dominating the availability of the dollar in the Egyptian market. Banks were completely stopped. But since 2024 and 2025, we are now in a very good situation. Dollars rate are very stable. But if we're talking globally, uh, uh, what, what we are seeing now in the market, what is President of the United States is doing, Trump is putting some penalties here and encouraging countries to fight and do some wars. This is affecting the U.S. currency, which put more pressure on the trade because one of the calculation when any importers would like to import any cargo, not only wheat, he has to calculate the exchange rate in his calculation because it's the cost. Whenever you cannot control this, it's a big problem for the importers. I'm not talking about the big player because big players are doing the hedging for the US currency, but normally it has a big effect. If you don't know the cost of the foreign exchange, it maybe affect the import activities. And this is what we faced in Egypt in the 2022 and the 2023. So dollar rates jumped from 35 pounds to 7, almost double. So you cannot calculate your cost, you cannot import. So these 2 years, especially if you look to the Egyptian imports, you will find numbers are not matching even or covering the needs of the market. Numbers was very below in wheat, in corn, in soya in these 2 specific years. But now, thanks to that, everything is coming now normal. And this, in Egypt, and talking about Egypt market now, the US dollar rates are stable, the foreign exchange is stable, but we cannot guarantee what is going the president of United States will do because every day we have a new clue coming from him. Put some penalties on this country, penetrating and encouraging this country to attack that country. So this is will remain the US dollar not stable for any country. This is from my point of view.
No, I totally agree that we live in a very uncertain.
Mhm.
In past, we used to think things are gonna become normal. We need to see trade differently. Now, today, trade actually is just not about looking at supply and demand. It has to every day you have to see what Mr. Trump is tweeting, right? And in the morning, then you have to see that is which country is going to be attacking which country, how much bombs are being sent across which
Yeah.
country. Then you find out which trade routes can get blocked. So now
Mhm.
trading is beyond just a simple trading. It has to be geopolitics, geoeconomics, agri-economics. So it is it's become a very complicated subject for sure. So, sir, that
Mhm.
brings me to the next question to you. Egypt is known that actually, the public sector, that is the government tenders, plays a very vital role in the overall trade. And I think they are having close to 50% of the import share. How do you see that actually, that panning out in future? Do you think the government's substantial import share or the market share in the import remain to that level? And when we talk about the private sector, are the government more equipped to take care of the price volatility, or it is the private sector which has acted smarter in maneuvering through these price changes?
Uh, Let me explain that the Egyptian market in the last 2 years has been having a lot of change. For example, that gas was disappearing from the market and was replaced with an agency with zero experience, unfortunately, to handle the imports of the wheat. But we are talking now that the private sector in Egypt is becoming stronger and stronger than the government part, and the 50% we were talking about in previous that it's the government share in the imports. It's not becoming any more 50%. It went down to 40, 45% maximum. And the balance coming from the private sector. Private sector is more active in the market than the government, especially after Mustafa Masr agency handling the imports. A lot of bureaucracy in their decision, delays, and they work with deferred payment LC with 270 days. So not a lot of suppliers are preferring to work with a new agency with the deferred payments. He doesn't know them, so this makes the supply to the government very tight, and in the same time, the private sector gains the opportunity and started to import more quantities and quantities and cover the needs of the Egyptian market. In my opinion, that we will see the role of the government in the coming few years will be coming lower and lower. And the private sector, I guess, he will handle more and more quantity of the wheat imports in the region. Flexibility, money, storage, a lot of the advantages has to in the favor of the private sector than the government. And especially we are not fighting with the government in the same market. For example, the government are importing from France. The private sector didn't import any quantity from France, only the government. The government also focusing on Romanian market and Bulgarian market, which is not the same market that, yes, we, the private sector, are importing, but with a small quantity from these two regions. So the role of the government is different on the role of the private sector. The government is focusing only on the wheat coming for the subsidized trade, which is almost 10 million tons per year only. This is the role of the government to cover this 10 million for the subsidized bread. Egypt normally consume 20 million tons of wheat yearly. So the government is counting on almost 5 to 6 million tons of imports and 4 million tons of the local crop, which was usually appear in the mid of April every year. So I see that the private sector will have a very good opportunity to increase his role in the market of the wheat. And just for your info and for our audience info, the government is not involved in the imports except only in wheat. If we're talking about maize, if we're talking about soybeans, the government is out of these two markets totally, has zero input in it. So the total quantities from corn, for example, 10 million tons per year, it's totally cool for the private sector. And we are talking about 4 to 5 million tons of soybeans is go totally for also the private sector. So I see that the private sector will be becoming more aggressive in the coming years, counting on the slow motion that the new agency is moving in both.
No, that's very interesting perspective you've given about how the public and private trade is separated. No, that brings me to the last question, a very pertinent question. We have seen in past that in Mediterranean that actually the floor price is predominantly unofficially set by Russians, right? Because they have a huge surpluses most of the time, and in a way the other origins, whether it is France or Romania, they are not able to catch up with Russia. Yeah. So eventually they set the floor price. Do you see that continue to happen, or do you see some changes there?
Actually, to be honest with you, if we compare the production this year with the production in last year, the production of this year is higher than last year. But what we see is last year prices, it was cheaper than this year. Okay. And this is give us a new evidence that it's not only supply and demand fundamentals, it's because of the war. For example, we were talking about 235 to 240 last year for the Russian wheat. We are talking now for 250, 255 for the Russian wheat on average for the longer this year. We still prefer to have the Black Sea origin in the private sector because of the price. This is number one. The transit time between Egypt and Russia or Egypt and Black Sea, which is very, for a Panamax vessel, it's 4 days. For Handy, it's 5 days. Even for coastal, it's 1 week. So you can get your supply very fast than if you order a one vessel coming from USA, for example. It takes sailing time around 28 days in the sea. So to go to other origin, we have to find another origin with a cheap price, which is not in the market. You can get it on so from Bulgaria, it's a little bit competing with the Russian and but the quantity is not big as Russia and Ukraine, and the quality also, to be honest, it's not the same. We are looking in another area like Latvia and so on, Lithuania, and get wheat, but it's expensive. So if we are forced to go to other origin, we have the opportunity to do it because the Egyptian government is approving 26 origins you can import from it. But the main factor is the price. You know, you can get you have a very fantastic quality in Australia, in Canada, in the hard wheat in US, but the price is killing if you are going to import this. So to be honest, clearly the Egyptian market is a price-oriented market. You know, you cannot go to a premium quality with a high price. This is not be a workable situation for the customer in Egypt.
No, sir, actually, though it was last question, one more, I'll take privilege of asking you one more question because you talked about the production better than last year in Egypt. And we have seen that Egypt has been trying to do a lot of things in agriculture to become self-sufficient and increase the productivity within Egypt, whether it is intervention through digital technologies or whether through better irrigation. Sir, what is your take? Like, do you see that the overall productivity of Egypt is going to improve substantially because Egypt is a large consumer as well as they have a huge amount of land. So if they are able to produce more, that would put a lot of, I would say, less pressure on the global value chains.
Look, it's a dream for the government, but when we come to reality, if we're talking about numbers, I don't think we will stop import. No way, no way. Even if you do more activities in agriculture and production and everything, for three reasons. Number one, the population. We are now almost 122 million. I know it's not a big number like India, but it's a big number in the Middle East. This is number one. The consumption per capita is almost 160 kilogram from wheat. If you multiply it, you're talking about 20 million tons wheat yearly. It's coming to increase. We have a population increase yearly around 2%. Now we have 15,000 tourism in 2024. And after the expansion we are making in the tourism sector, we are targeting this 15 to be 30. And the 30 is the president are asking the ministry to make it 100 million tourism in Egypt. So tourism is putting more pressure on consumption. They need to eat. We have refugees in Egypt. It's almost, we're talking about 10 million refugees in the country. They are eating from what we are eating. So we're talking about big number of population compared with the land it will not cover. So we were talking about to have to put or increase the land just to make sure that we are putting some local crops increase yearly, but we will not catch and the imports will not stop. This is the fact which the government was not able to announce to everyone. But this is it's as a truth. You will not stop importing wheat, especially to Egypt.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Mr. Hesham. It was pleasure talking to you, and maybe uh, soon to have Aish Baladi with you in Cairo, and
This
and
will be
looking
our
forward.
pleasure to have you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
looking forward, sir. Thanks a lot. So with that,
You are welcome.
from Egypt and Mediterranean, let's come back home, and we are having our next speaker who is again a very known voice when it comes to grains and pulses trade in India. So we are having Mr. Rajiv Yadav. He is a supply chain leader with extensive experience in Indian food processing and nutrition sector. At Paras Nutrition, he oversees the complex logistics of sourcing raw material for value-added products. His role likely involves navigating the procurement of quality grains in a fragmented Indian market. With a background and often bridges operational efficiency and strategic sourcing, Rajiv understands the cost to serve, impact of supply chain disruption. He represents the industrial buyer's voice, focused on consistency, quality specs, and just-in-time delivery in a landscape often plagued by infrastructure bottleneck. Over to you, Rajiv, your initial comment and views that how do you see Indian markets shaping up?
Eh, uh, Hello, Deepak Bhai. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, loud and clear, sir.
Great. First and foremost, thank you for having me on this show. It's a pleasure of mine. And thank you for this great introduction. I am not sure how much of it I actually worth of, but nevertheless, thank you so much. Having said so, my opening remarks, I don't know, my this thing is functional, the audio and video both.
Everything is functional. You are looking as younger as ever.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So what I was trying to say is you had a great discussion with Mr. Soliman. My initial comments, if I look at on the global perspective, I mean, the weather gods have been kind across the northern hemispheres and southern hemispheres, and courtesy that if you look at Chicago, whether you talk about wheat, whether you talk about maize, whether you talk about soybeans, or we are adequately placed in terms of the production. So there's from the availability or the supply side of it, I'm not very much worried both globally and, as you rightly said, even on the domestic side. We are much better off as compared to last year. If I specifically talk about wheat, we were as low as we were like at 10% of our stock to use ratio, and now we are at almost 20%. So in last 3 years, we have almost back to normal situation. As you rightly said in the beginning, there were the years when we were talking about that we are just short of India is just opening up the imports, just opening up the import. And we kept talking about it on every conference, every platform, and nothing transpired that to be a reality. And I would say probably at that point of time, the government did an excellent job in terms of maintaining the prices and yet not allow the imports and all that stuff. On the global front, uh, more than what you call it, the supply side, as I said, is already secured on almost on all sides. Whether you talk about northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, productions have been good. But as Soliman Bhai was also saying that today it is more to do with geoeconomics, geopolitics, which country is banning which particular commodity, and which countries are stopping the movement of the goods from one country to another. Then you have the Swiss Canal crisis coming up. Then you have the insurance premiums going up. So it's basically more geopolitical driven crisis and not a supply driven crisis across the world today. This has also forced the countries like Russia and Bulgaria and Kazakhstan to start exploring the alternate sea route also, which is a very difficult one. They are also trying to work upon to open the northern sea route, wherein you don't have to get your vessels onto this side of the world, whereas you take the Arctic Ocean and then go towards China and Korea and that side. But the problem with that particular route is it's available only for 6 months, because for the balance 6 months it's completely frozen and all that stuff. So but that is definitely because of these geopolitical crises. Today that route is being explored both primarily from Russia and Ukraine, and not Ukraine for the time being, Bulgaria and a couple of other countries, to see that how they can avoid this crisis zone which is currently existing. So that's on the Indian front. I'm pretty comfortable. I don't see any crisis. The prices are likely to remain stable. We had a very good production of about, the numbers keep varying from 115 to 120. Everybody carries a different number in their books, but that's where we are. Consumption side, pretty much steady growth, which is directly proportional more to do with population, and not much of the significant change on account of the GDP growth or whatever. But yes, that has also contributed marginally in terms of, the population is consuming higher versions of wheat products, and that's where some bit of additional demand is coming in from that side. But otherwise, it's primarily population driven. So those are my opening remarks, Deepak Bhai.
Perfect. Very well said. And actually, like, when we talk about getting alternative routes, and how difficult it could be, like, going all the way to Arctic and just to get some grain, right? I think, like, sometimes our politicians, they talk about things which are more of a posturing to communicate something other than something which trade would take it from both hands. Yes, I know some ships have been like, moving, but I think it could be exception. It cannot be the ground reality. Now coming
For the
back
time being,
to,
yes.
yeah, coming back to Rajiv ji, like, India. So
Yeah.
you said you put such a rosy picture that actually, like, I was so elated that I might be getting my chapati, like, half the price, but that doesn't happen. Now, do you think, like, with such a glut, right, which we talk about both in rice but predominantly in wheat as well? Do you think that now it's time to open up for export, at least to start with the wheat products, and then eventually to wheat? Because with these numbers, that the prices are not going to sustain for a very long, because the numbers which we are talking is really huge.
Uh, as you rightly said, I mean, as I said, when I was trying to paint a rosy picture, yes, for the time being, it's looking like a rosy picture. And I am little bit more confident because this year India had excellent monsoon. The soil moisture levels are pretty good. The water levels in the reservoirs and the dams is pretty good. So I'm expecting another bumper crop whenever it comes in 2026, April, May, June onwards, so that will add additional pressure in terms of, whether government has adequate storage space available with them or no. So yes, I suppose from the S&D perspective, from the availability perspective, we have to, we can only request to the government that yes, it is a time to start thinking on the lines of, opening up the exports. So I would say, I would not use the word open up the wheat exports, but I would say at least let's start with the wheat products exports is what is my outlook. Jumping onto the wheat exports, and especially in big quantities, I am still skeptical. But firstly, the government might not look at that side, looking at all these kind of geopolitical crises happening in and around. And tomorrow, nobody today, it's not only India, I mean, probably almost each and every country is very insecure in terms of food availability, and they don't want to take chances around. So wheat export looks to me in a question mark. The other word of caution, which I would say is, if you look at the private weather agencies, something like Skymet, or they're also talking about, that going forward in 2026, we might have sub par monsoon to the extent of 50 to 60%. Now, that word of caution is good enough for the government to not to think or venture into the market wherein we open the exports for 2 months, we continue, and then we are forced into a situation where we stop the exports of the wheat overnight. So with that word of caution, wheat, I'm not sure whether the government will look into it, but yes, for the time being, quota based exports of wheat products can definitely be looked at.
No, I agree with you, Rajiv ji, but again, a known devil is better than unknown devil. So the
Yeah.
unknown devil led us to situation where we'll be having the government granaries filled with more than 100 million metric tons of rice when the procurement ends. Then we add up another 30, 36, 37, 38, or 40, whatever, right, wheat into that, with 140 million metric ton of, I would say, dead inventory, right? It is far beyond the buffer limits. The reason to create buffer limits was with that mindset itself. And I would also like to know your perspective. Why so much of inhibition of opening and closing export, right? With very clear mandate. And see, Philippines, they have done so smartly. While, like, we have to learn from them. They said 3 months, 2.5 months back that, okay, fine, we are not going to import any rice to safeguard our farmers. January will come with quota and January will open. And it ends in January. And after that, it's not there. So I would say that even the government can be agile and, like, make policies based on what they're having. Otherwise, you end up giving rice, subsidized rice, to ethanol industry to fuel the cars, which doesn't make any sense to me at least.
No, I totally agree, and it was my honor to share so many stages with you where probably we both have spoken on the similar lines that yes, the government of the mindset has to be a little bit more agile in terms of looking at the exports. And if you remember in one of the wheat seminars, I'd also gone to the extent of that if you look at the production chart of India, the majority of the wheat producing states are in the north. Whereas if I call it as organized consumption, it's happening towards the southern part of the country. So from that perspective, I would suggest that even the wheat exports can always be allowed at least during the peak harvest season to reduce the pressure on the mandis, and we have a decent outlet of that wheat into the export market from ports like Kandla and Mundra, and at the same time for the end consumers allow them to import at southern ports. And because the transportation cost which we are incurring from moving the goods from wheat from north to south is as good as moving it from Black Sea origin to the southern ports. So from that perspective, yes, there are definitely the possibilities do exist. But as I said, the government is, and the thought process is not being run by people like you and me. It is the government who takes the call basis their judgment and the judgment of the bureaucrats around them. But from that perspective, I'm definitely game with that. We can think of allowing the exports happening simultaneously, if I may use the word simultaneously, from the western ports, and then import on the southern ports can also be a possibility going forward.
Yeah, I think that is where we have to move. We have to be more flexible with the type of availability of grain globally, right? The type of the stocks globally available. You don't see the spikes where, until unless a big geopolitical issue, right? And we know that some of the global leadership is very capable of doing that. I think, we have to start thinking more with agility. Otherwise, the cost to the exchequer and the taxpayer of hoarding grains and then selling it cheap at no good reason is going to hurt everyone. Now let's come to the quality consistency. Do you see that actually, some of these weather patterns, right? They are creating variability when it comes to the typically the wheat quality, whether it is a protein content or content, and how difficult, how easy it is for you, because actually, you are also the consumer of wheat. How challenging is that, to a certain quality availability? Because that when you go to typically uh, the up north global markets, it is about the protein content, the price based on so many things. In India, wheat is a wheat, and then actually it is 24 rupees a kg or 28 rupees a kg. How as a private player, you maneuver the quality challenges?
No, I mean, Deepak bhai, a very pertinent question. As an end consumer, I would like to answer a question differently. And what are the possible suggestions? I'll take it in my second part. So, as an end consumer, as you rightly said, uh, in my current set of scheme of things, wheat doesn't, happen to be a very significant ingredient. But overall, if since I've worked with the flour millers, and my dear friend Mitesh Bhai is also on the is another co-speaker, and he would vouch for me that as an end consumer, these weather variations, variability, and even the regional variability creates a hell lot of problem for an end consumer, whether it is a flour miller to come out with the required specifications of flour. Because as we said, since we are moving towards the further addition of value based products of wheat, value added products of wheat, and they require different specifications in terms of protein, in terms of stretchability of gluten, in terms of there are so many other parameters which are involved. As an end consumer, it becomes very difficult when we are buying wheat from different regions, because some wheat would be as good as 10% protein. If I buy a durum wheat, it might have a protein to the level of about 13%, 12.5 to 13%. So we have to always, come out with the best possible blends in terms of in terms of striking the balance to get the required percentage of protein and gluten in the end product, which is a wheat flour. So that definitely remains a challenge and a big challenge as an end consumer. Having said so, my bigger concern, we have been, we have moved to a courtesy the green revolution, we became self-sufficient. Today we are at a stage where we are talking about exporting, assumption that we have to open the exports. There's a good journey which has happened over a period of time. But if you look at it, it is only in India where wheat is traded as wheat, and it is always a price-driven purchase. It has never been a protein-driven, where when it comes to export and import, there's no contract happening without the protein content level, because that becomes the most important parameter for the wheat quality. So my suggestion going forward would be that whatever purchase of FCI which is happening, whether it is in Punjab, Haryana, UP, Rajasthan, or whichever parts of the wheat country, can FCI take a proactive approach that now, instead of purely being a rupee buyer, a rupee driven or an MSP driven buyer, can I be a protein driven buyer wherein I constitute, different rates? 10% protein, this valuation, 11% protein, this valuation, 12% protein, this valuation. Now that will incentivize the farmer also to go for that kind of a variety, higher protein level variety, because he knows his realization is good. Today, everybody is equal in the market. Anything which looks like wheat is as good as wheat. So that trend in India has to be broken, and that initiative, probably it is too large an initiative for any flour miller to take, or any organized industry at a private level. Probably that initial push has to come in from government, whether it involves, an investment of 500 to 1,000 crores or 2,000 crores. I don't have that number, wherein you have the protein testers put across various mandis, and then you do the procurement basis the protein levels. That's more of a long-term suggestion, going forward, because the whole world talks, when you talk about wheat, we talk about protein, but that concept doesn't exist in India as well.
No, I think that this concept needs to change, and this is where actually government should be moving. Now, coming to the last question, Rajivji, to you, we talked about logistics, we talked about the quality, we talked about overall supply and demand, and even the trade routes. Now, coming to you, which is, I believe, again, policy driven, because in fact, you'll be surprised, we have the theme of this session itself is geopolitics. Right. But now I would take politics to the policy part of it. This OMS's game, right? Now the OMSS is always been, again, very unstructured. Do you see that in your current avatar, previous avatar, that inventory management for a private place becomes such a extreme challenge when there is no clarity on OMSS? How do you see, and how do you position or structure, or what would be your recommendation to some of the traders, right, to, I would say, navigate the OMSS and the stock limit part of it? Currently we don't have any threat of stock limits, but you never know. I think sometime some babu or some bureaucrat, some official in Kisan Bhavan wakes up and say that today it's a day of stock limit, or today it's day of OMSS. How do you maneuver these challenges?
Probably, in terms of the solution, the fact of the matter remains that today it has become a big challenge for any end consumer, because the stock limits and stock controls have become a reality. They become all the more grave in the years when the FCI stocks come down and the government is running low on the stocks. Those were the years when these stock limits take the demons shape. And in the years when we have adequate supply, something like this year, we are assuming that, the interventions would be relatively lesser. As and when the government will have, storage space constraints, they'll push more OMSs so that their wheat gets finds an outlet into the open market. So I suppose, as an end consumer, after watching the government actions in different years, in different ways and manners, whether it's a good crop year or a bumper stock year or whatever, because in India the wheat trades purely on the FCI stocks. That's the bottom line. higher the FCI stocks, lesser would be the ups and downs or swings in the market. The moment the stocks start going down, then there's a hue and cry, and then obviously everybody is up their sleeves in terms of, just get hold of wheat, otherwise we'll not find wheat to run our mills. So definitely it has become a challenge. As an alternative solution to it, probably, I don't know. Again, as one of the mindsets of the government is that as and when there is a abnormal teji or a abnormal mandi in any particular commodity, the first thing is ban the NCDX or that particular contract. So I would say one of the only reasonable answers which I get is that NCDX wheat contract should be relaunched, and it should have adequate liquidity available so that the end consumer actually starts using NCDX platform as a hedging platform rather than being just a notional wheat contract. So that could be the only alternative which comes to my mind. Second, we can put up a word of request to the government that they have to be, if I look at the last stock order limit, probably for any flour miller, it was as low as 3 months of inventory or something like that. So that probably, can be at 6 months level or whatever. So I don't know what's that right number, but those are the kind of things which will give a little bit more comfort to the end miller or the end consumer, rather than having the absolute tight stock controls and limits. When it comes to a wholesaler and a trader, the limits are as good as nothing. So he goes completely out of picture the moment stock limits are introduced. So that's where we stand. That's a reality of a country like India. PDS continues to remain very, very important factor for us, whether it is a political compulsion or whether it is the need of the hour. I don't have the answer. You know it better. So I leave it up to you to take that call. But yeah, I mean, that's what my point is about it.
No, you're very rightly articulated. In fact, I was talking to someone who is a global grains head of one large company which operates in India as well. And we were talking about some consulting opportunity. And he asked me, like, Deepak, I know you for a long time. How do you define yourself? I said, actually, I'm having put my foot in the shoes of being an agroeconomist. And he said that you'll make more money if you start changing the word and say geo policy economist. I can give you premium. So that's where we are. Thanks a lot, Rajiv. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on multiple forums. And with
Thank
that,
you.
we would move to our next speaker. And now let's talk with someone who is having skin in the game. So I would like to invite Mr. Mitesh Gupta, and he is managing director of Shiftara Grain Milling, a prominent flour milling operation based out of Hyderabad, Telangana. That's the southern part of India. He is also actively involved with the role of Flour Mill Federation of India, giving him a dual perspective, that of a business owner and as an industry representative. His company processes wheat into maida, suji, atta, placing him directly at the mercy of wheat price volatility and even sometimes the government's policy as well. Mitesh's work focuses on crushing margins, the thin the line between the wheat procurement cost and the floor realization, making him an expert on the operational survival of the milling sector. Welcome, Mitesh bhai. It's a pleasure to have you as our speaker. And your initial remarks, sir, your perspective on whatever you have heard so far, and overall how the markets are.
Thank you, Deepak. It was nice to see Rajiv after so many years. You said he looks so young, but I haven't seen him in so many years. I was going to call him up and say, listen, Rajiv, you're looking slightly older. My initial remarks on the industry, so I'm only from the industry side of it. I don't understand the agri-economics as much. And the industry is in a pretty bad shape last year and this year. And I feel the main reason is the government intervention time and again. And I wish there weren't so much intervention. I think we've also had a couple of chats on that. And I wish they, just let the industry survive. We're not saying give us any subsidies or even a rupee, but I just wish they let us survive without the interventions.
No, I totally agree, and this is where actually I was pulling leg of Rajiv saying that actually every company now need geo policy economists, not just agriculture economists. Now coming to something which you are doing day in and day out, the margin squeeze. So with the wheat price often disconnected from the floor price, we have seen the retail prices and the type of competition with so many retailers there, processors there. And then also everybody wants to rotate, right? The working capital they're having. What is the single biggest operational lever a miller like you can pull to protect margins in 2026? I think that is
Yeah.
under severe constraints.
Deepak, that's a great question. As a processor, there is not much value addition we offer. We buy wheat or we are offered the wheat and we process it into wheat products, atta, maida, suji, wheat bran, etc. The value addition is less than 10% of the cost of wheat as such. So on the operational side, which is production, power, packaging material, there's not much that we can do. Couple of areas where millers were operationally slightly beneficial, were handling this better was stocking of raw material, like Rajiv said, for 1 month to 3 months. And that has become uneconomical, or rather very scary, with all the interventions. Suddenly we hear wheat prices have gone down. Suddenly they have gone up because of the volatility in the market due to government interventions. If we take out the wheat volatility, the only other way a miller can get some operational leverage is building a brand of his own and slowly and steadily commanding a slight premium on his products. That is, not the core business of a miller. Normally, a miller just processes the raw material and gives it to a customer like a large MNC or wholesalers. But I think if we have to start looking at brand building, that could be a very good area for millers to get higher margins.
So perfect. No, I totally agree with you. And when we talk about higher value addition, but at the same time, we have seen that predominantly the milling sector is not very upbeat about doing that. We have seen the large companies, the large players, whether we talk about ITCs, have been trying to play that, and even the new kid in the block, actually, right? So those type of people, they are still thinking of that, and I've seen also some innovation, right? I was talking with Raji about the protein content, right? Suddenly you are seeing that the atta, which is high in protein, is going off the shelf like crazy. It is very difficult to get sold off. ITC is protein-rich atta. Or then we are also seeing other players coming out with different types of flours, right? Whether it is the black wheat flour, or different ways of doing the marketing of. Do you see that the overall I would say that interest in milling industry to go beyond just the flooring and try to be a little bit innovative and break this cycle of the dependence on the price volatility, government policies? Because if you ask me, some of these brands, they are actually hardly concerned about the policies, because if you are selling something for 80, 90, 100 rupees a kg, right?
Right.
Kapli atta and all that, right? I think they are not looking at whether government comes with government, because government doesn't have that wheat availability. But do you see that there is also a little bit have to start thinking a little bit beyond?
Actually, brand building has not been a core business for millers. The core business has just been processing. So yes, innovation in the brand should be a focus for millers, but we normally rely on our large customers who are into chapatis or biscuits or atta or other consumer products, who are touching the customer last, into FMCG products, to do the innovation and tell us, listen, this is the product we require. Can you tweak it a little bit? High fiber, low protein, high protein, low gluten, whatever it is. So we cater to those kind of customers who require the product. Millers really don't have the bandwidth to innovate. Neither do they have the bandwidth to have a distribution network like all the big guys. You need deep pockets. You need a multiple range of products to be in the distribution game. And that is one of the reasons why when I talk to millers, and every miller has their own brand. I have a Shivtara brand that does just 2% of my business, 2% of my volume. But I'm able to manufacture for 10 other brands, right? And when I talk to millers, what is the challenge? Why are we not able to build our own brand? Millers always say that, listen, number one, we don't have the deep pockets. Number two, the distribution network is so vast with some of these companies, and the range of products is so vast that we can't really have so many products. Lastly, atta maida has become a commodity. It is like buying steel or cement or any of the other commodities. So it's a price game. There's not much product variation, differentiation in our products. So yeah, it becomes challenging for a miller. And innovation, yeah, I always keep looking, where can I innovate? But we keep innovating in process, in the delivery channels to our customer. We never look at the product innovation. Maybe that is one area where millers should come up and say, hey, listen, here I'm giving you millets or a combined a product which you can offer to your customers. Yeah, maybe that's one area we should be looking at.
Great. So Mitesh, now from the consumer facing front to the actual process. Now we have seen that again the Indian millers are unfortunately restrained with the type of grains available to them because we don't import, and then actually unlike Al Ghurair or some other company in UAE, right? They have option of if I find a specific product at the right price from Russia, I'll take it from there, or I'll take it from Australia, I'll take it from Canada, I'll take it from India in case India allows export whenever. But that's not, I would say, that privilege you have. Do you see that because of the climate limitations, so that the quality of wheat is a little bit constrained, which leads to lower efficiency? Because the eventually, the turnout ratio is very important for a miller. Do you see those constraints happening already, or do you see that actually, no, there is not too much of a problem?
So, Deepak, I don't see much of a problem because of climate. I just checked the hectoliter weight for the last few years, and I don't see a very big difference in the hectoliter weight from 2021 until now. So, to answer your question, I don't think because of climate or a higher temperature, the wheat is getting shriveled a lot more than before. But I resonate with what Rajiv Yadav was saying earlier. I wish there were more consistency in the quality of wheat that is being procured in the mandis in India. We are dependent on rakes or trucks that come to our factories, and each and every truck has different variety of wheat. Within the same truck, there are different varieties of wheat. If there are 100 or 200 bags in a truck, we have to really check each and every bag to see what kind of wheat, what quality of wheat, higher gluten, lower gluten, and more than the protein content. I feel if the refraction, the mitti and the dunkli and the mud balls and stones, etc., can be checked at the procurement level, it will really help millers and the whole value chain. I wish at the procurement level we had some norms that not more than 1% refraction will be allowed when we procure the wheat. And that ecosystem can be easily created. I don't think there's much of a problem. In states like Punjab, they already have that, where they just pass the wheat through a simple separator, take out some stones and mud balls, etc., and then pack the wheat. So I feel FCI and whoever is doing the procurement should insist on clean wheat, which is just wheat. So that it benefits the value chain. To answer your question on climate change, I don't see much of a difference as yet. I believe there are some heat resistant varieties also that have come up. So yeah, I don't see that much of a difference due to climate.
Now, coming to the north-south divide, right? We are a beautiful country which is well integrated, but at the same time, the distances means cost, right? I would love to say that, one country, one price, that is fine.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, wheat is not produced in south, and then actually, when we go towards north, a lot of wheat is produced in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. Now, getting the logistics sorted out and bringing it down to South India, there is a cost. So how do you see, even Rajiv talked about it, do you think it is going to make more sense that actually we allow import in the southern ports and then we allow export in the west and maybe the eastern part of India, rather than actually doing all the ground transportation, which I also believe is environmentally not sustainable, right? While we talk about environment sustainability and we have odd even cars, the pollution, we talk about everything in the world, but actually we don't talk about how to be sustainable in logistics. Do you see that actually, there is a constraint in the southern part of India for the millers because the logistic cost is the wheat price can go up and down. Logistic price only goes up predominantly, right?
Yeah.
So how do you take care of that issue?
Well, there are two parts of the question. How do we take care of the issue and how we would wish for it to be? How we take care of that issue? Of course, the lorry freight has gone up over the years and impacts a lot. So lorry freight is between 2 rupees a kg to 4 rupees a kg, depending on which region. Let's say Hyderabad would be 2 rupees from just MP, 3 rupees from UP, and a Bangalore would be 3 to 4 rupees. And it keeps going higher as you go further down south. So more and more movement of wheat to the south has moved to rake by freight, rail freight, which is more economical. And I see that happening going forward because the volumes are increasing due to consolidation. Mills are bigger, so the volumes of wheat that they stock 1 month or 2 months or 3 months also bigger. They can accommodate rakes of wheat, and they get one. Usually, they get one variety of wheat in one rake, which is 2,500 to 3,000 tons. Whereas lorries are inconsistent in quality, and the freight is also higher. How do we mitigate that problem of high freight from the north to the south? One brilliant idea is, of course, open up imports for the south, but it's a very big political decision. I don't know if that could happen. I think in years where there is a shortage, that should be an option. That import some wheat, at least for the southern millers, because it's cheaper for us to get wheat from on the ports rather than lug it all the way from North India to South India. And it helps the sustainability, circularity, eco-friendly, all those matters. How else can we mitigate the risk? By just stocking more. Usually the southern millers stock more volume of wheat than the northern millers. Northern millers, I believe, get wheat by tractors on a daily basis. We don't have that benefit. So yeah, these are the only two ways. How do we wish for it to be? Of course, if the government can allow imports for South, it would really be great.
No, thanks a lot, Mitesh, for your perspective. In fact, I'm having very strong views and take on this. First of all, we cannot hide behind continuously this MSP regime, where actually, we want to keep on increasing MSP every year. I strongly believe that makes incentive for farmer not to be profitable, not to be economically viable, as well as productive, which takes away a lot of resources from a country, unfortunately. Second, this very rigid approach about import and export. It seems that if India opens up import, then the world is going to crash on India, or this false prestige of that we have to import wheat. I think that is all past. That is in past. We have seen example of countries like where they have been importing huge amount of wheat, and actually you find that their own farmers, their overall production of soybean has increased, but has created a very vibrant market. So I think we have to go beyond this, old school thought process of rigidity. We have to look at economics. We have to look at, again, we want to be carbon neutral by 2070, right? You cannot do that by sending all the rakes of wheat and rice all the way to the southern part of India, and then actually in a very inefficient way. Uh, every kilometer leads to losses of the quality as well as quantity, that as well. So those
Yeah.
losses, are a challenge. Second, I'm pretty my strong views are that inflation is in your mind, right? Inflation, just like any now, nobody's questioning that why gold is at $4,300 an ounce, or why silver has crossed 2.4 lakhs a kg. Those things, these are commodities. So we have to in case support those who cannot afford it, those who are poor, those who are unprivileged. The government social ecosystem should kick in, but it cannot be where actually you disrupt the businesses to actually, I would say, pass on the responsibility of the government to the private trade. With that, thanks a lot, Mitesh. It's a pleasure to have you. And now we move to our
Thank you.
next speaker. And after this interesting debate, past two of our speaker has been more aligned to India. Now we go to the global stage. Now I'm having Cesar Soares. He's a seasoned commodity strategist with a career spanning over 25 years in agriculture market analysis. His expertise often centers on the intersection of weather patterns, crop forecasting, and price risk management. As a strategic advisor, he helps trading houses and procurement teams interpret complex data set, from whether it is weather cycles to global balance sheet. The form actionable hedging strategy, he is a master. Caesar is known for his ability to translate high-level macro links trends like whether it's weather, La Nina, El Nino, etc., into specific yield impacts for wheat and grains in Americas and Europe, offering a forward-looking view on price resilience. Thanks a lot, Cesar, to be part of this discussion. It's an honor to have you, sir. Your initial views on how do you see, the wheat market unfolding? The volatility is making everybody unnerved.
Well, Deepak, thank you very much for inviting me to this discussion. It's really a pleasure to be with you and with your esteemed speakers. I attended yesterday and I'll attend the rest of the week. So I think this is a great format. And it's great for everybody to get together at the beginning of the year and starting looking forward to the challenges that lie ahead and maybe reflecting a little bit on the back of the year. Your introduction is way too gracious. If I was that esteemed and that good, I'd probably be on a yacht retired somewhere in Monaco. That's what I tell everybody. However, I'm still sitting here talking in a panel. So no, I think so far there's been some very interesting discussions. I think the challenges raised in India is something certainly which is a recurring theme. As long as I've been somehow directly or indirectly trading with or through India or with Indian colleagues, I hear the same themes, the same discussions, and certainly this wheat dynamic is something that the government and the government policy around wheat is certainly something that has to be looked at and optimized. I was listening to Hesham's discussion on the Black Sea and the geopolitics. And certainly we've got a challenge, and I sort of bring it through to what you sort of intimated on volatility, where we have geopolitical uncertainty, we have climate headlines, but I'm not sure that we have volatility. We have some volatility, but I think it's the volatility that nobody likes, and I think that's why. As we have the esteemed colleague on the milling side saying that it's, there's some volatility in Indian prices, but it's not a positive volatility. Globally, traders are being challenged because the volatility range is generally low, and global buyers and in what Hesham has already highlighted, for example, in Egypt, are expecting slightly lower prices and prices are slightly higher. So overall, I think we start 2025 with 2026, sorry, with a 2025 behind us, which maybe showed less volatility than it appears, or it appears from a headline perspective. And really the question is what's going to play out ahead of us. We have enough elements that could suggest that things could go wild or not. And I think that's really the discussion. That's really the interest going forward.
Perfect. So now, let me talk about one specific volatility which is not in control of even Mr. Trump. That's the climate. Right. And we see off and on, the climate is not acting generally in the models which we are comfortable with. Right. There have been extreme weather in many parts of the world, and that is becoming now one of the regular phenomena. And actually, if you see that the global debate, whether you go to Geneva Grain Week, or whether you go to Gulf Food, or whether you go all the way to IGC conference in London, one very, I would say, strong discussion or the area of discussion which takes 30 to 40% of overall time is about weather. How do you see weather volatility impacting, or are we have already seen, I would say, sufficiently a lot where trader can take decisions or can plan for such weather volatilities or a climate change?
It's a very difficult question in the sense that let's look at where we are. So as per NOAA, we're sort of moving from a La Nina into a neutral type of phase. Okay, so what does that mean? What does neutral mean? It means normal, less predictable outlook for the summer. And that's basically what it means. So what does normal mean? And I think this sort of touches on what you are intimating, which is, we've had a large number of extreme weather events over the last years. If you look at heat waves and you look at summer weather sort of abnormalities or anomalies, over the last 5 years, 7 years, we've had a significant amount of extreme weather events in many of the major grain producing and wheat producing regions around the world. We've all lived through that. You've had extreme conditions in India. We've had extreme conditions in Australia. We've had extreme conditions in the United States, in Europe, in Argentina. And the challenge is not so much, it feels to me, to predict the climate, because there are models that can help you understand that it's going to be warmer than normal, it's going to be cooler than normal. What appears to me more difficult is to translate that into the crop impacts and the yield impact and the ultimate production impact. And I think this is what the market is really struggling with today. When we look at production this past year, you could argue there's many crops in the list of crops that you went through at the beginning of this presentation that you could say were surprising. Russia may be surprised on the upside, given the weather evolution through the late winter, early spring, late summer. There was an expectation that the Russian crop was maybe going to be slightly lower than ending up slightly higher. The Indian crop, with all respect, has surprised a little bit on the upside from what the observer would look at. Over the last 2 years, when you look at the weather maps for the Indian wheat areas, there were multiple times that you could have said, wow, obviously this is going to impact the crop much more significantly than what it did impact the crop. The same was in Europe. Argentina, the size of the crop, the Canadian record crop that we have this year. In other words, we've had successive record crops on net aggregate over the last years. Have we had record optimal conditions? I think this is our challenge. This is where translating the climate to the crop forecasts is becoming more difficult. So it's not so much a question of climate, and it's not so much a question of predicting the climate. I think, as you say, the pattern or the trend is known. It's getting hotter. It's getting wetter in some areas. It's getting more extreme. Can we say that this is translating to a predictable pattern or a predictable impact on crops on a net aggregate basis? I struggle to see that. And we see that in prices. Mr. Soliman was talking about the CNF Egypt price, which is correct. It's slightly up from last year because there's freight and there's more geopolitical risk in the Black Sea. But if you look at Russian FOB prices, Ukrainian FOB prices, what has happened in the last 12 months? 220 to 240 to 215 to 235 to 225. If, for everybody on this call that has got any kind of track record trading our markets, to see a global FOB level, which only variates by between 5 to 10% over the period of 12 months, in an environment where we've got so much extreme geopolitical, climate, political uncertainty, it's almost exceptional. So the challenge, I think, is to translate the risk, and there is risk. There is geopolitical, there is climate risk, obviously. Translating that to price and to market action is now becoming the greatest challenge.
pretty very well articulated, and I totally agree with you. For example, like last year, my team and myself have went to across India, and in typically January, the heat wave was there, and we could see that there would be a substantial reduction in the yields because the crop condition didn't look well, right, in Punjab and in the Western Uttar Pradesh. And that's why we put an estimate of close to 99 million metric ton, which was a little bit better than the previous year, but still like, less than 100 million metric ton. And till March also, like, crop was not shaping up well. And you'll be surprised in last 15 days in the harvest, right? Eventually the number comes out to be 103 million metric ton. So either like, our crops have also become resilient, right, on their own. And I'm not talking about a specific type of seed being used. I'm talking about the same seed being used. At the same time, as you have heard from one of the miller, Mitesh, right, he said that actually even the quality has not suffered too much. So when you are having not, and in India, like, nobody counts protein. So I don't know whether actually the protein content increase or decrease, right? So do you think, and such scenario, like, when we use our predictive models, right, which is historical data of 20 years, 25 years, they have totally become irrelevant, and we are trying to hedge the unhedgeable. Do you think that the movements, they have become like, part of the game? Like, there is no mechanism where like, you would be able to take care of all the commas and footsteps. And sometimes some traders would emerge as very smart just because of a gut feeling, or sometimes like, it might totally backfire. You see, we are living in at least that level of uncertainty.
Well, hedging the unhedgeable, I like the way that you frame it. First of all, for the buyer, the global buyer, not necessarily the Indian buyer, because you are captive to government policy. But the global buyer has done the perfect hedging for the last 3 years. And the perfect hedging was to buy hand to mouth, which is a strategy, right? And I think, there is a quality concern coming from extreme weather. But quality concerns are ultimately, in the case of wheat, going to get translated to quality spreads, right? So let's imagine that one of the consequences of extreme weather, let's say, is maybe not production. Maybe production goes up, but maybe it means that certain qualities of wheat go down on, call it a hectoliter, call it a protein basis, due to extreme rainfall or other factors. Ultimately, it's just going to mean a widening of quality spreads. And ultimately, this is going to be, the real hedging is going to come in from the miller's ability to deal with this differentiating quality. My experience has told me that the miller's best hedge against quality is to be as multi-origin as possible. I remember trading South Africa when I was trading in South Africa many, many years ago, trading the first Argentine wheat into South Africa, where the South African millers were at that stage very cautious of the Argentine wheat quality. And they preferred the Canadian and the Australian. But ultimately, the cheap price of the Argentine became enough of an incentive. I remember when we started opening up the world to Russian and Ukrainian wheat and even Kazakh wheat, people were very cautious about the qualities. A market like Egypt was, very hesitant to take Russian wheat, but eventually the price of Russian wheat did the job. So I think if we're looking at quality risk, then the real question of quality risk is there really a quality shift? And if there is a quality shift, does the domestic market that the miller is producing for, does that domestic market really pay a premium for that quality? Or are there techniques, are there, let's call it industrial processes and other technologies that you can use to use a lower quality wheat to produce a similar type of product? So I think from a milling perspective, playing the options and the optional origin is extremely important. As to price policy, I think really one of the big questions that buyers have to ask themselves, I think, is two things today. One is, am I subjectively, because I'm never going to ask a miller or a trader to be objective. It doesn't work that way. So let's go subjectively. Subjectively, do you believe there's upside or downside to prices? And then subjectively, if you believe that there is downside to prices, how much do you really expect from the current prices? Russian wheat FOB today is going towards $225 FOB. Let's imagine that you as a buyer believe that the prices can go down. How much do you really expect prices to go down? I think these are the key questions to ask at this stage. As we enter 2025, I think we have a ENSO forecast, which tells us anything can happen with the weather. It can be extreme. It might not be extreme. We've had 1 year where prices were around 220 to 230 to 240 FOB. We have come down from a Russian invasion in Ukraine. Prices were at 440, 450, 460. We've come all the way down to 190 Matif to $225 FOB. Do you really expect that prices go down? And if they go down, how much are you expecting them to go down? And then you've got to make yourself that evaluation, I think, in January 2026. You've got to say, if I'm expecting prices to go down $10, which is less than 5%, how do I measure all the unknowns in terms of the potential upside? So I think when we're talking about specific hedging policies and hedging strategies today, you've benefited as a buyer from being hand to mouth. Well done. It's been the right strategy. It's how you've maintained and optimized your marginality. From here, it is now a call. And I would say that generally, the past does not repeat itself. We've had 3.5 years of rapid price declines. We are at an inflation-adjusted low price. I would be cautious to say that we are going to see a 2026 and a 2027 which replicates what we've seen in 2025.
No, I totally agree with you. In fact, I think we are already at the bottom. I agree with you. But at the same time, what the global buyers have been able to hedge, as you rightly said, in the just-in-time strategy, right, hands to mouth. But that can also backfire going forward because you take care of weather volatility and price volatility by being hands to mouth. But geopolitics can actually turn it around and create, I would say, an island where suddenly you are disconnected to the world, you don't have supplies, and then you are having the super inflation. And any government would be very careful that they want anything but super inflation. So do you think that even that, in 2026, with the type of geopolitics we are seeing, right, and it is the start itself has shown you that actually what the year could be in geopolitics, right? One of the most decent democracy attacking, right, and picking up a president of another so-called not so decent democracy. And now that is all the perspective. I'm not even going to the politics, right? Different people could have different perspective, but that shows that this maneuvering, China sitting close to Taiwan and the South China Sea is constrained. Then we see what happened between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, which can suddenly restrict the access to Suez Canal or Gulf of Aden. And similarly, the Venezuela maneuver, it could have been the worst, where actually the Panama Strait could have been impacted. So do you see these things, right, constrain this long-term approach of hands to mouth?
They might. My personal problem is that wheat today is at 225 when we are in the middle of a war between the two of the world's biggest wheat exporters. And not only the two world's wheat exporters, or two of the world's wheat exporters, but in one of the world's biggest grains exporting zones. And prices have gone down over $200 during this period. Now, I don't want to be cynical because I am the ultimate optimist, so I'm the anti-cynicist. But what would, as you mentioned, a Taiwan invasion have to do with the price of wheat that is more extreme than the current conflict and war in the Black Sea? And this is where I wonder whether, in a way, this is not telling us that the market is very assured of the farmer's reaction to price. What we have seen over the last couple of years, I would summarize the last 4 years in 2 camps. I would summarize on the one camp, there were the physical traders, and on the other camp, there was the managed money and the funds. The traders for the last 4 years have seen a wall in the most important physical wheat export space and the ultimate geopolitical risk of a lack of global supply. Through all of this, the funds in general, as a global money community, have been short generally over this whole period. So what the money has told you is, if I interpret it, is, okay, that's fine, but prices went to $15 Chicago or $14 Chicago in 2022. Wheat price Matif went to 440 euros. At those prices, farmers will plant, and with the current technology, we will produce. And in a way, they've said, okay, there are geopolitical issues, but price will do the job. And price and the market did the job. Despite the invasion into Ukraine and the blocking of the Ukrainian ports, Ukraine still exported all the old surplus of wheat. Price and economics did the job, even though it was at the cost of the farmer, because ultimately the farmer paid the price. So in a way, it's sort of, it's almost a dogmatic discussion. It's, yes, I agree. Geopolitics is obviously an enormous issue. And tomorrow things could blow up. I am a bit wiser today than I was in 2021. If you asked me this question in 2021, and you said, Caesar, where will we be in 2026 January if the sequence of events played out as from February 2022 till January 2026, I would have told you probably wheat price is going to be $500 FOB. In reality, price is $220 FOB and Matif is at $190. So I am a bit smarter today than I was 4 years ago. However, and I think this is the key to me, history is a very poor predicator of the future in our markets, as the price of silver is showing us. So does it mean that because the market has been able to translate and process all of this geopolitical and climate risk over the last 3 to 4 years, does that mean we should be lackadaisical or we should be, let's say, not concerned? And I think we come back to the point raised earlier. Here in January 2026, I think it is time, and you suggested it, that, buyers particularly, because the risk is now on the buyers, let's say, because it's a risk of low price potentially going up, are maybe now having to take stock and say, okay, we've had a good run. Maybe now is the timing to take a little bit forward cover. Maybe now is the timing to start thinking of some hedging strategies which can maybe protect us against the potential upside.
I totally agree with you, and very, I would say, aptly articulated. In fact, today morning itself, I've written an article because I was talking to a few people last week on predictive models using AI in agriculture. And they were very sharp, smart guys who were making the algorithms, very smart people. But unfortunately, as you rightly said, they believe that just like any other data set, history teaches you a lot. And I say that you are hallucinating, right? In agriculture commodity, history doesn't lead you to future. And you rightly articulated that. And we have to start moving from just predicting to simulating, right? If else analysis, if this happens, then what? And as you rightly said, not you, even I would have said 500 plus, you're having so much of turmoil, so much of climate events. There is no reason actually, that you won't have a serious shortages, but it didn't turn up like that. So with that, thanks a lot, Caesar. It was really interesting perspective, and love the way you have articulated it. And I think audience have learned a lot. And I think some of the young traders would have better 2026 just because of what you told them. Thank you. And
Thank you. Thank you very
and
much.
with that, we move to our next speaker. And again, we are gonna be having an international interesting discussion. So I'm having with me Anna Maria Archipiotto. My apologies in case my pronunciation was not that great. She leads the trading desk at Promising International, a Dubai-based powerhouse in grain trade. Her firm is a major supplier of wheat to East Africa and Middle East, often dealing with complex origins like Black Sea, Ethiopia, to name few. Anna's role requires mastering the execution side of trade, navigating sanctions, securing vessels, and managing counterparty risk in a volatile market which we have. She brings the traders energy, fast pace, risk aware, and focus on the spread between origin and destination. Her expertise is critical for understanding how political shocks translate into physical trade flow. Welcome, Anna. How are you? You're on mute, Anna. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. Good morning. Good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
Good
Yourself?
morning. Yeah, good to see you, and thanks a lot for joining. So your initial views, actually, you're trying to walk a tightrope of ensuring profitability in certain uncertainty, specifically in the areas you work. Your initial views, ma'am.
Well, okay. I mean, everything everyone has said, I kind of echo in terms of, and Cesar's explanation now was fantastic. So I'll stick to just the execution side. Yes, for us, it is an issue because particularly in banking. So Russia, as we know, is a prime exporter. And it is probably the number one origin in Ethiopia and Egypt and all these places, mainly because of price. But sanctions now are making it more difficult to generate the documentation through the banking channel in the traditional way. So that's becoming a challenge. And we're seeing a lot of tightening within the banking system wherever Russian origin is mentioned. So yeah, that's what I feel that is not a problem of price or availability of wheat. It's a problem of execution, particularly from areas such as origins such as Russia. So that's and as a result, this year, yeah, I think areas such as Tunisia, Libya, and definitely Ethiopia, they've been introduced to origins like Romania, which have been very successful, mainly because of the execution. You don't have a build-up of vessels. You can get a quick turnaround of loading in and out. And you don't face the problem of a payment problem because of the Russian origin mentioned on the bills of lading or the documents.
Perfect. So I would like to understand these, as you rightly mentioned, that the payment problems for Russia is a big concern, and it has been across for a really long time. But do you see that actually people trying to shift to non-dollar currencies going forward, because that could at least safeguard a little bit of interest. And we have seen that the trade between Russia, China, India, Russia, they have tried to de-dollarize, so that actually they face lesser of the problem, specifically in crisis when it comes to the payment not being received. Do you think that going forward that could be one of the template?
I think so. I think that's probably going to be an option that people are going to have to explore to see whether they can. Sometimes it's not just the currency, it's also the origin. But yes, I think if dollar is eliminated from it, it should assist in challenging combating the sanction that the US has on Russia, but it doesn't necessarily combat the sanctions other countries may have on Russia too in maybe other currencies. So yeah, it can, but there is always going to be an element that Russia is sanctioned in different directions, and that can down the line still cause a problem. But yeah, that is one option that is being looked at.
And how severe is typically the vessel rejections or port congestion? Do you see that also challenging far much on execution part of it?
Yeah, so Black Sea, especially Novo, which is the biggest port out of Russia this year, it is suffering a lot in congestion, mainly because of politics locally, where pricing and taxes are constantly volatile. So we spoke about price volatility. I agree with Cesar, there isn't a huge price volatility, but there is internal volatility with how taxes are going to be put, foreign exchange. And this has an impact on whether the farmers are going to bring the wheat to the port or keep it because it's not cost effective. That has added to the logistics coming out of Russia in particular, and we have seen a build-up of vessels there this year, which has had a domino effect on the freight rates. So we're seeing freight rates now out of Russia to the Red Sea around $40-45 a ton. Last year it was $25 on average, $25-30 per ton on average. So there is a huge uptake on that. So whilst FOB prices more or less have been within range, freights and other cost factors have added to it. And the other cost factors are also, yes, if you have issues with documentation, that slows down your banking process and your vessel arrives, you don't have documents. You then have the risk of delays, demurrages. So there are added risks. So when you take all that into account, sometimes it's better to pay that $5 more in Romania and take the goods.
Right. And you also deal a lot with the African markets. There also, there are, other than the geopolitics, there are infrastructural bottlenecks also. Many of the ports in Africa have those challenges. So even that becomes a little bit of a nightmare when trying to execute a trade, whether it is inbound or outbound from Africa.
There is. I mean, if we just showed Djibouti as an example, so Ethiopia's landlocked. Most of its imports come through Djibouti. So you have there the reliance of all imports, whether it's fertilizers, wheat, sugar, everything comes there. Now, this season, at this time of year, where you have planting taking place, fertilizer takes priority. So the government in Ethiopia will block trans truckers from taking any other cargo other than fertilizer. So you have a huge buildup at the port there that slows down your logistics, and it creates a bottleneck in Djibouti with transporting your wheat from Djibouti to Ethiopia to your millers. And then you have, of course, the foreign exchange issue as well, that goods are sold in local currency, but translating it into dollars, the dollar availability is not there in Ethiopia, so that takes a long process as well and that affects your payment coming in on your imports. So that does have an impact.
Yeah, I've seen that, there are multiple rates going on in Ethiopia. If you are taking conversion on street, and Djibouti is not very easy port to deal with. We all know that.
Yeah.
So now I would like to talk a little bit about the buyer assurances. So in a seller's market, which we see that buyers take what they get, right? In a buyer's market, they get picky. What are we in 2006? Are we going to be buyer's market or are we going to be seller's market? And are the buyers demanding stricter specification, whether it is about time, whether it is about the payment, whether it is about quality? Do you see that actually, buyers are becoming a little bit more finicky?
I mean, I think it is buyer's market for the simple reason there's very little volatility and there's plenty of supply. So it is a buyer's market in terms of the demand is there, but also the supply is there. But yeah, I think the transfer to other origins outside of Russia is mainly to do with the execution out of Russia, because you can go through the Baltic, but that's going to add a lot more. You're going to pay $20-25 more in freight. So sometimes it's better to take it from Romania. So as an example, this year we've seen at least 150,000 tons of Romanian wheat going to Ethiopia, which was unheard of 2 years ago. They were mainly buying Russian and maybe some Ukraine, but mainly Russian. And they preferred Russian. So by introducing the Romanian, which they may find it a better quality, but it was just a quicker execution. And so, yeah, they have adapted to other origins as well in order to ensure the timely execution of the shipments.
Do you think these concerns also make a person like you, when you are on the trading desk, when you are compiling your data, that the inconvenience also lead to shift of origins, or it is just purely the price game?
It's not really a price game because Russian is on an FOB basis is the cheaper origin. It's more the freight comes into it, but it's also the execution. So your freight from Constanza, for example, is slightly lower than Russia. The execution is faster. You can have a vessel stuck in Novel for 3-4 weeks, and that's your demurrage. So whilst you're benefiting on the FOB price, you're risking the demurrage cost. So I think for buyers, as long as the spec is there and the quality is good, I don't think they have a problem to shift to another origin.
And do you see that the compliance cost also becoming prohibitive for some of the origins? Because we have all talks about shadow shifts to, as you rightly mentioned, currencies and all that. So these are some of the costs actually you incur, but it is very difficult to document. So do you see that uh, as a trade desk, right? It becomes difficult in coming out with the right price points, which is on which the trade needs to happen.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the whole picture. So when you're doing your trade, you put everything into account. So it's your FOB, it's your execution, it's your documentation, channel, any risk in payments, any potential delays. So I think you take the whole compliance into account. Because we're dealing directly with millers and importers, we know that on a monthly basis they need to have their wheat there at the port. So every month we would look what is the best option for us at that moment in time to take. But Russia, for example, we are seeing a lot of banks in Ethiopia refusing to open letters of credit with Russian origin. So we are seeing that this is tightening as time goes. Whilst the situation has been there for the last 4 or 5 years, it is tightening as time goes on. So whereas that issue wasn't there a year ago, which is now. You have another issue where before you had a system called Franco Valuta in Ethiopia, which allowed importers to pay for money outside of the country. That's been banned now. So the money has to be channeled through the banking system in Ethiopia, which again adds to the woes of whether you'll be able to import something like Russia, if your documentation will be accepted down the line, because there's lots of protocols to go through from taking your goods from Djibouti into Ethiopia. There's lots of custom offices that one may say yes, the other may say no. So there's always that risk factor.
So, coming to the last part of it, your suggestions, for those traders who want to get into such difficult type of trades, Russia, Ethiopia, right? What would be I would say the checklist. What 2 or 3 things they should be very careful about and keep an eye on before they get into any trade deal?
Number one is the spec. Number two, it's the timely execution. And number three, I think you need to understand the country very well and the buyers, because Ethiopia and Djibouti is not straightforward CFR contract, not at all. And a lot of these sales are done on a stock and sell basis as well. So you take your goods, you store it, you sell it. So you need to kind of understand the local market there, what you're competing against, because you're not the only importer. There's other vessels that are coming in. So it's understanding the market well enough. But I think we are seeing a transition to other origins because of the issue in the Black Sea. And I think that will be translated also to Egypt. It has been this year to a small extent, not a big extent. Iran, of course, because of sanctions there, it is still a big buyer of Russian, and that probably will continue to be the case. And we've seen systems, for example, Egypt this year has changed its way it buys. So that created some documentation problem a month ago, which I think has been cleared. But okay, I mean, whenever there's a shift in everything that comes with it. And it's a matter of going through it, learning the pitfalls and moving on.
And also, last question again, do you see the defaults also increasing in current scenarios, whether on the supply side or on the payment side, or it is as good or as bad as a few years back?
I think because, as I said, there isn't a huge volatility in price. There isn't being cause for default unless it's finance issue, unless your end buyer has been unable to secure their finance. or the finance has not been able to be executed in paying something like a Russian document, and you've had to go through a different channel to try and get these documents approved. That I would say is more of a delay than a default.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. It was really a pleasure having you, and for the perspective, because you are doing one of the most difficult job. The type of origin and destination you are working in is it's not easy. And as you rightly mentioned, that understand the local business, understand the local conditions, understand the local culture, and the relationship between different stakeholders. That is very important. Sometimes the opportunities are there. You might see a premium, but that premium might eventually turn into risk. Thanks a lot, Anna. It was a pleasure talking to you. And
Thank you.
now I would go to our last speaker, and we are having one of a very extremely recognized and appreciated individual, Mr. Mark Ostwald, and he's a heavyweight in global macroeconomics. As a chief economist at ADMSI in London, he provides the high-level strategic view that connects interest rate, currency wars, and geopolitics to the commodities market. Mark is a regular commentator on Bloomberg and CNBC, known for his literal thinking that links seemingly unrelated events, whether it is about bond yield spike or to commodity trade flows, to name a few. He is not a grain trader, he is a global strategist who explains why the money is moving into or out of the grain sector. So he's someone the traders who trade in grain look at for a lot of insight. His analysis sets the risk on and off tone for the entire conference which we are having today. Thanks a lot, Mark. Your initial comments, sir.
Hi, Deepak.
So we would like to hear from you, Mark, your initial views on how do you see, the world unfolding in front of us. World is a very different place.
Yes, I mean, it's very complex. The US intervention in Venezuela upends a lot of previous assumptions. Previously, well, for much of last year, the US president was advocating peace everywhere. And then suddenly we have all these military interventions, the threat of interventions in other places in Latin America. And obviously Latin America is so important for the whole agricultural sector. So it makes things equally, we are back with a spheres of influence regime, whether it, we know that's always been in place with Russia, but that the US now reverts to, whether you want to call it Mr. Trump's Dunroe doctrine or the old Monroe doctrine, it is, I would say, somewhat regressive, but it doesn't really matter. I think the important point in terms of geopolitics for a lot of people is to understand that having great discussions about the rights or wrongs, the morals, the ethics, achieves nothing, sadly. One just has to deal with the situation as it is. It's going to be fluid. It's going to be fickle. It's going to be ambiguous. One only has to have a look at what happened last year with tariffs. I'll pick the example of aluminium, but the metal sector. We went from a situation where everything was slapped on to suddenly there are 890 exceptions with another 900 odd on the potential exceptions list. And that's just something that people are going to have to deal with. It is what it is. It basically means one has to be agile, adaptable, and above all, always aware of what actually is going on and not making any long-term assumptions. And that obviously has an impact on markets, though I think probably the most interesting aspect of last year was how markets showed a degree of so-called shock fatigue, i.e. that news which, say, 5-10 years ago would have been considered to be a 5% mover on the day suddenly becomes a 0.5% mover. The best example obviously being the US bombing of the Iranian atomic facilities. Markets basically don't like pricing in political risk. And it's understandable because quite a lot of it doesn't materialize. But I think one could also say that in the background, the fact that we have a monetary policy system which basically looks to smother any disruptions in the financial in the plumbing of the financial markets, above all the dollar base, needs to be always borne in mind. And that is probably where the biggest risk lies, in terms of always assuming there is some sort of Fed, ECB, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, it doesn't really matter which central bank, most importantly, obviously, the Fed, put, because we are in a different situation in terms of monetary policy relative to debt accumulation. And there isn't actually much on the fiscal front which can be done, while the inflation risks that are obviously there in the world from all these array of political and trade risks mean that the idea that we can cut interest rates back to the sort of levels that we saw in the prior decade is simply not a safe one.
I totally agree with you, Mark. When we say that, like, in the past, we have a scenario, no news is a good news. But now we are saying that bad news is no news. So world is fatigued out with, like, daily reading what Mr. Trump would be putting on social media and how the maneuvering of the policies would be. But at the same time, we have seen that globally, the cost of funds has gone up. Whether we see Japan, what they are doing, like, they have changed the regime of mindset of, like, highly, like, no interest or very low interest to, like, charging interest. Similarly, we are seeing that in Norway, and even, like, cost of capital in the Western Hemisphere has also increased. Do you see in such scenario, when the cost of funds are high, it is difficult for people to hold on to their stock, whether as a sovereign nation or as a trader? Do you think that would put a pressure on the liquidity of the commodity? Because wheat doesn't work in vacuum, right? There is a cost of holding that inventory. Do you think that is also leading to this lower price regime, because we have too much of supply and nobody wants to have inventory?
Well, we certainly have, an S&D outlook. Something which impressed me at most of the grains conferences I was at the end of last year was just how much people were disappointed that all the disruptions which were expected, whether from climate, whether from trade tariffs at the beginning of last year, basically didn't, change the fact that we've got a large carryover going into this year, and whatever the supply disruptions are, that undermines things. But the cost of carry, we've got two factors now. Before, we could just focus on dollar rates. That's no longer safe, simply because a lot of trade is no longer exclusively in dollars. We're seeing countries like Russia, countries like China looking more, even, and in bilateral trade, particularly with countries like India, looking to settle in local currency. So the dollar is a factor, but then so are others. And then we have this situation where we've got interference in the US interest rate policy formation from politics, which is very much there, as much as the Fed basically will continue, I believe, to try and assert its autonomy. That political interference factor is basically skewing market expectations. So we have expectations that dollar rates will come down. But does that actually mean that there will be more capital available for financing, for instance, agricultural commodity trade? I don't think so. Simply because people are becoming that much more risk averse. The more complex part in all of this equation is Japan has departed its previous super easy monetary policy, is gradually moving away from that, probably too slowly, relative to its inflation risks, the relative strength of its economy, particularly the export sector, which has, I think the strength of Asian exports above and beyond just agricultural, in broad terms, has been the one thing which caught people a little bit off guard last year. People expected China to suffer more from being excluded from the United States in certain sectors. and it didn't materialize. It found alternative sources, above all Africa. In growth terms, Chinese exports to Africa last year grew 51%. That's enormous. It's a sea change, and it also changes trade flows. And that, I think, basically tells another tale about the commodities sector in general, that it will always basically adapt to what the situation is. If something can't go from A to B via X and Y, then basically the commodity traders will inevitably always basically say, right, well, find me a different solution. What is the different solution? Your previous speaker, Amara, just now was talking about, what are the problems? So cost of capital is an issue, I think, and it's going to be an important one, particularly if we start to see any problems, because there is a lot of risk appetite out there. There isn't, if you look at it from the investor side of the equation, much spare cash to basically protect themselves in the event of a sharp downturn, whether it's in equity markets, whether it's in bond yields, whether it's in commodities, whether it's volatility in currencies. There just isn't a lot of protection out there. And then you have to consider the other real big problem of our modern day and age is the options market, be it in commodities, be it in bonds, be it in equities, is the tail that is wagging the dog, which means you see much more of what I call lift shaft movements in any form of asset prices, be it commodities, property, anything. There are sudden drops which you can't, you can basically try and protect yourselves via the options market, but there's always this fundamentally that issue with how much am I willing to sacrifice via all my hedges in terms of my potential P&L. So you're trying to commit this balancing act, which is an extraordinarily difficult one, between wanting to maximize returns on your core views, and on the other hand, hedging for the fact that as much as we seem to be rather risk indifferent, if one looked at it from the geopolitical aspect, the risk hasn't gone away. It's just that we don't want to commit a lot of money to hedging against those risks, because ultimately, at the end of the day, if those risks don't materialize, that's money basically which is going to go out the window. So it is a very, very difficult situation. And I think in terms of interest rates, above all, we went through a period in 2024 where interest rate expectations were extraordinarily volatile, particularly in the United States. That impacts, above all, commodity markets across the board. We then went into a period last year where interest rate volatility dropped very sharply. That facilitated a lot of risk appetite and continues to facilitate it as we move into this year. However, I suspect that interest rate volatility is going to be considerably higher this year than it was last year. Perhaps not as high as in 2024, but that interest rate volatility then basically changes people's way of investing and indeed trading. So it's both the short term and the long term, because suddenly the interest rate volatility affects both cost of carry in the commodity markets, but also the cost of carry of other investments. And if we have sudden problems because of imbalanced positions, for instance, in the tech sector, and people start to have to liquidate good positions, i.e. Gresham's law, good positions to finance the bad ones, suddenly the interest rate volatility becomes even greater.
Mark, actually, one more interesting aspect this is talked about, tail wagging the dog. So do you see that actually, the current geopolitics is outcome of, the currency wars? the petrodollar being compromised when it happened in Iraq and Libya. Those regimes were removed. Venezuela also tried doing that. So now we are seeing actually unfolding of a real currency war, which is creating all these geopolitical event around it, rather than other way around, that geopolitics leading to currency.
We are basically we are in a currency war situation. We're also in a situation where, because everyone was very, I mean, there's a prime example from last year, which I think is a very important one for everyone to bear in mind. Asia, since the Russian stroke tiger economy crisis of 1997, has basically gone longer and longer and longer of dollars. The beginning of last year, with the new administration coming in the US, they suddenly questioned a strategy. And one has to remember, Asia has vast amounts of capital, the most important pool of capital in the world, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's China, Japan, South Korea. The pool of capital it doesn't move very quickly. It is not like the Anglo-Saxon world of, all right, well, that trade's a loser, let's just trash it. They don't shift their policies very quickly. But at the beginning of last year, suddenly they realized that basically this long of dollars, long of US assets policy that they've pursued for a long time needed to be changed. And so suddenly at the beginning of last year, we saw that real big weakness in the dollar. That's done for the time being. I would suggest that the other side, the risk of the other side now is on the other side of the equation now, which is dollar liquidity. But because of that change that we saw last year, not only in Asia but also elsewhere, this the US dollar exceptionalism is basically one which is changed. There is a belief that the US tech sector can carry on outperforming for a very long time, but people don't want to have the dollar risk in the way that they did. So that's, they want the US assets, but they don't necessarily want the dollar risk. So that creates an environment where people are now, we had a fantastic year for emerging market currencies, even currently countries such as Egypt, which have always historically had problems in accessing dollars, in accessing finance for, above all, their agricultural trade, saw their currencies appreciate enormously, particularly due to the attractiveness of Egyptian interest rates. We've seen that with Brazil. We've seen that to a certain extent with Turkey. And this diversification that investors are doing basically means now they're effectively still short of dollars and long of EM. The justification is diversification, which is absolutely justified. Having all your eggs in one basket is not a good strategy in terms of portfolio management. But now we have this other risk, particularly for those people who have been going into Latin America. The Mexican peso had a stellar year. When one compares the performance of the Mexican peso in the first Trump administration, where it was probably one of the most hated currencies in the world, going from around 14, 15 to 21. And then last year, it goes from 21 to 18, and everyone's saying, wow, this is the best performing currency in the world. We don't understand it. But it is about diversification. So people are very low. But now we have this new threat, particularly following the invasion of it, where the US is basically saying, this is our sphere of influence. This is the messaging that I'm getting. How US policymakers would explain it is, of course, a different issue. But the US policymakers are saying, we reserve the right to intervene, even militarily, in any country which we don't like something or we want to have an influence. And within that context, we've got presidential elections in Colombia in June, and presidential and parliamentary elections in October. So that basically has everyone basically goggle-eyed, staring at what is the US going to do next? Where are the risks? So it's a currency war situation in the sense of for most emerging economies, particularly what I would call more developing and frontier ones, rather than say large emerging economies such as Brazil. They don't really want their currencies to appreciate because it makes them less competitive, above all for agricultural and resource-related exports. On the other hand, they do want to attract the inflows, and they do want to ensure that they have access to foreign exchange to finance all of this. So it's a very difficult situation. I mean, to me, when I look at the change of strategy in Egypt, forget the rules, but it's very understandable for a country like Egypt, which is historically obviously a very large buyer of agricultural commodities, particularly things like wheat, that they have changed their strategy from a much longer term perspective to one which says, well, if the Egyptian pound is appreciating and agricultural commodity prices are under pressure, we don't need to be doing this long-term thing. We need to operate on a much more agile, just-in-time basis. Now, that could easily change if access to foreign exchange suddenly becomes much more restricted and there are disruptions within the dollar financing system, because as much as other countries do a lot more in terms of local currency, for countries like Egypt and developing frontier economies, that is not nearly easily as done as when you've got, say, a big pile of foreign exchange reserves, which you can dip into at any time. And if you deplete it by 20%, you don't really care, because you're still, at the end of the day, have a very large pile of foreign exchange reserves. That's not the case with countries like Egypt or many countries in North Africa or the weaker economies in the Middle East.
No, I totally agree with you. Question, people are reacting differently to bad news, specifically the conflict. So this fatigue, do you think that has also led to a complacency where actually we are too early to price out the war premium? Or do you think actually the market have really find a genuine way to bypass such conflict risks?
The war premium, I think we probably are erring on the side of complacency. Everything that we look at, and this applies across all asset classes, really. There is a great deal of complacency there. It'll be all right on the night. To a certain extent, I'd call that Pavlovian, i.e., it's the conditioning that we've gone through over the series of shocks from COVID onwards, leaving aside the whole period of low interest rates, that everything is going to be all right. And basically assuming that we're going to have a big disaster, say, like the huge inflation shock and interest rate shock of 2022, even then, people basically said, well, this is just another opportunity to buy, well, what was a bigger dip, but at the end of the day, it was a big dip. That's all it was, and the ultimate trajectory is higher. It's not just the war premium related to Russia and Ukraine. To my way of thinking, what's going on at the moment, the peace talks or the peace negotiations between the US and Ukraine, which Russia is not really part of, other than start looking at it rather cynically, is not ultimately probably the biggest one. The big issue for that war, is two-sided. One, this is the fourth year of the war. Ukraine is running out of manpower. The Western support is disjointed. It needs all that, as probably more support than it's actually currently getting. So there is a point at where Ukraine actually, just from a logistical point of view, may not actually be able to carry on waging that war. The other side of that coin, and one which is, I think, much under discussed, is the Russian economy. Russia basically can't actually go to a more peaceful situation. Its economy is so geared to war now that going to a more peaceful environment would require a lot of adjustments, which with a banking system with an absolute ton of bad loans on its books, it couldn't shift, and it's also depleted a lot of its reserves in financing this war. So anything else would require either cutting spending elsewhere, raising taxes, all sort of things which the indifference which there's been to the war to a certain extent would become very material, and the economy could experience an enormous shock. So it's not complacency necessarily about the peace negotiations or the prospect for the peace negotiations, but it's the economic situation in both economic, demographic, the ability to carry on waging those wars, which is the most significant one, at the same time as all these other interventions are happening. We're in a situation where we've got great instability in Iran. We've got a fear of instability across the whole of Latin America now. These are, we shouldn't be complacent to those risks, even though I'd be the first to say, I'm not sure how you would price that. How do you hedge yourself against it, other than looking at very extremes? And that's probably the things that people need to have a look at. It's not pricing for the short-term movements, but pricing for, those big sharp shifts where you get an elevator movement either upwards or downwards, but it's a lift shaft movement with an elevator without a cord. So suddenly, you won't ever capture any of those prices unless your optionality of your hedges is at the extremes. And even then, it's not guaranteed, but it's probably a better strategy than trying to micromanage. This isn't I think probably the simple message, it's not a micromanagement situation. One needs to filter out a lot of the noise that there is. Obviously, when one looks at people need, particularly traders need to trade their book, and they'll carry on trading their book purely on a P&L basis, making sure that it's being properly managed. But the primary risks are basically all around big shocks, and the one that comes along, which everyone goes, well, do we need to react to this? So that probably brings us to a third risk, that immediate reaction to a situation shouldn't necessarily be taken as that's the end story. We may often get delayed reactions in financial market prices, whether it's commodities or in something else, where there is a sudden realization that this is actually quite serious, and people start to really, particularly, I think, this is where the physical derivatives divide in commodity markets comes importantly into place, that suddenly the derivatives market, it's not derivatives market noise, but people in the physical market suddenly starting to change their strategies. And the physical market is actually in many ways probably more important, because that change of strategy would be very, very significant with, in terms of both changing trade flows as well as changing people's consideration. Your previous speaker was talking about, yes, there is basically the normal thing to do with what's this year, the S&D outlook, but there is so much peripheral to this, whether it's tariffs, regulations, geopolitical tensions, and not to be dismissed, the other one that people are rerouting because they're actually realizing that the demand centers in the world are changing. Europe is not a reliable demand center anymore. North America, particularly the US, is not a reliable demand center. But people are actually realizing, looking at Asia, looking at Africa, looking at Latin America, and saying, you know what? These countries are gradually becoming, they have weight in the world economy. And it's not really surprising. Europe and North America constitute 800 million people in an 8 billion population world. They shouldn't really be, they shouldn't be basically the piper calling the tune.
No, I totally agree. So coming to you with my last question, Mark. Actually, very interesting. Like it's a pleasure to be just hearing what you say. Now, do you see like generally the investment flows, are they increasing, decreasing, or freezing, or remaining the same in agriculture commodities? Do you think the risk is too much for people to like stick their neck out and put more investments, or you see it's a life as usual?
I think there is definitely a lot more interest in getting involved in commodities in general. I think where agricultural commodities are suffering at the moment, leaving aside the S&D outlook, which is obviously very material. I'm not dismissing that. But there is a crowding out effect from people's interests in metals and in energy. Because of people are more worried about resource security, and they don't. This is where the agricultural bit is of particular interest. They don't consider, particularly with the S&D outlook that we have, that everything is actually quite plentiful. That's a big risk where they can materially see supply chain risks, above all in metals and in energy. But if we then look across from grains to softs and have a look at what's happened with coffee and cocoa and sugar over the past couple of years, the idea that we couldn't get the sort of, even if, particularly with things like cocoa, the supply chain is much more limited than, say, wheat or corn. The choice of suppliers is much, much bigger in the grain sector. It's still a salutary lesson for all of us that these things can happen, and dropping a very small part of a very small disruption to part of a supply chain can actually have a much more material and longer term impact. So the investment flows, I would suggest at the moment, people want more, above all because they could still consider there to be a lot of inflation risks. And agriculture, we've seen a lot of problems with that. Food prices have been a problem in Japan. There have been a problem in the UK, which have been highlighted. Even in the US, they are a persistent problem in a lot of developing countries, which contribute a lot to inflation, which they variously succeed in managing, depending on whether they have a long-term, centrally governed buying policy in place. So I think the interest is there. My fear at the moment, though, is we're getting a crowding out process, and we might need more of a shock in the agricultural space to get people more interested. The reverse side of that particular mirror, on the other hand, is if one looks at current positioning, most people think that the supply side is going to be very plentiful. The market, the speculative market, is net short. That basically should act as a floor under most agricultural commodities, simply for the fact that we're already pricing in a plentiful supply outlook. So the question is, will the demand outlook improve, or is it going to be pretty much steady as she goes? As pretty much, for the last 10 years, I've been looking at this more closely, and every year people basically say, well, demand outlook's quite boring. It's steady as she goes. Even with countries like China and India, who are obviously the most significant buyers, simply on a population basis. But I don't think, that the supply outlook is necessarily always going to stay that way. B, I think the demand outlook may actually improve. The world economy has proved rather more resilient in particularly the last year, but also in the COVID period and post-COVID. Even if one would have to add that was largely due to monetary policy largesse. It is proving to be a lot more resilient. There are going to be disruptions above all due to technology changes. But if one was going to basically say global economic outlook, where are the really big risks? I'd say they're more to the upside than to the downside. Particularly, there's an important one sort of final thought on this is what we have is a sea change relative to the pre-COVID period and the post-COVID period. Pre-COVID, if you looked at economic surveys, they generally tended to be more optimistic than the actual official data outcomes were. Now we've got a situation where pretty much every survey, wherever you look, is more downbeat. And when the official data come out, and this doesn't really change across geographies, the official data come out, things are much better than people are the surveys have been telling us that they were going to be. So that's where to me the balance of risk lies. It doesn't mean we're going for a boom, but if you're planning on thinking about, well, could demand pick up more than I expected or be better than I expected, that's the side of where I would be pricing, looking to say, have I got my bets right? If I see a sudden increased demand, can I meet that demand?
Perfect. Very, I would say, articulate in putting your views, Mark, and it is always a pleasure to hear you. And I would say that the best prescription we got, and we are more real COVID. So with that, I would like to thank you. And with that, we come to the end of this interesting session on wheat. And as you know that the thing doesn't end here. We'll be having 4 more sessions over this week as a part of the Grain Week. And tomorrow we will be talking about something which is closer home and one of the very important commodity, that is rice. And with that, I thank all of you for your time and being part of this interesting conversation. Looking forward to see you tomorrow again. Take care. Goodbye. Thank you.